There are three terms on my formal analysis list that often confuse people because in life we typically interchange these terms. So I'm going to cover size, scale, and proportion in this little video, starting with size, which is a formal element. And when you think about size, think about measurement. Sure, we use the words big and small, but it's going to be much more useful if you give a measurement, because what you think is a big house, I might think is a small house, but chances are no, because I think a small house is like 300 square feet. But what you think is a big house, I might think is small. So if you use some kind of measurement, if you say it's about 10 feet tall or it's about 10 inches tall, it's going to be much more useful and you'll communicate much more clearly. So, for instance, if I was going to talk about the size of my house, I could say my house is 1,000 square feet, or my house is 20 feet tall, and then I could talk about, my 1,000 square feet is more than adequate for 2 people and 2 dogs and blah, blah, blah. Or with 20 feet, I have plenty of room for insulation in the attic, a tall room, and then a crawl space underneath for all the things that we need, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so that's size. And with artwork, size can have a huge impact on how you see things. For instance, Oldenban and Van Breugen's Spoon Bridge, which is at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis, and what I think is the happiest sculpture of all time, is 30 feet tall. The subject matter of a spoon and a cherry is associated with ice cream sundaes, and in a place like Minneapolis where you have miserable winters and sometimes you get lots of snow piled up underneath it, it looks like an enormous ice cream sundae, and it makes me very happy. Now, if this had been 6 inches instead of 30 feet, I would respond to it in a very different way, and I probably wouldn't remember it at all. So, the size here has a big impact on how I view this. I was looking for some sculptures by a Chicago sculptor who had done these hidden cities in crevices in buildings, and I couldn't find them. So I had to, mainly I couldn't find them because I couldn't remember his name. So instead I am using another sculpture by a London sculptor who did the same thing. And here, what Helen Notting has done is she's gone around London and put these little unexpected miniature sculptures in places, and they're very delightful because they're so small, and there's a sense of discovery when you find them, and that very small nature of this 6-inch wide sculpture hidden in the building gives you a sense of discovery as opposed to something that's 6 feet tall and you see readily, and you're used to that, so you kind of dismiss it. So size can really impact how you see things. Artists can use size to convey that this is something that is significant or insignificant, to pull you closer, to force you to view it from farther away, or to completely envelope the space that you see, so it completely contain your peripheral vision. There are lots of ways of using size. Scale is when you compare the size of one thing to another thing. So you're comparing two distinct things. It can be subject matter within an artwork, and I'll give you an example of that. So back to my house. My house is 1,000 square feet. My sister's house is 5,000 square feet. We're going to call her my rich sister. And we could say, oh, I'm so much more modest in my 1,000 square feet than my sister. Or we could say, my 1,000 square feet accommodates 2 people quite well, whereas she needs a larger house to accommodate 4 full-time residents and the swarm of guests that she gets in Southern California. We could say maybe she's flashier than I am, whatever. That's not true, but you could come up with some effects that big house overlooking the ocean in Palos Verdes Estates has on you, where you get much more sense of awe and grandeur than my small little house that looks across at a schoolyard. So scale is when you compare the size of two different things. Those two different things don't have to be distinct things. They can be parts of the same artwork. So for instance, in the Palette of Narmer, a very famous Egyptian sculpture, the man marked with 1 is substantially smaller than the man marked with the number 2. Two distinct parts of the subject matter. And these are not just natural size distinctions. We look at man 2 and we assume that he is far more important or has greater power than man number 1. And in fact, this use of scale to show importance is called hierarchy of scale or hierarchical scale. Now on to proportion. You've probably used the word proportion at some point in your life, and if you have an acquaintance who has like disproportionately large eyes or disproportionately large hips, it's very common to use it with body parts, but you can also use it, say, with that house. So let's pretend that my sister had no taste and was, let's pretend she was a movie star and she didn't want people watching her or looking at her or the paparazzi getting to her. She could take that big house and put disproportionately small windows all over that house, and you would really have a sense that she doesn't want anyone looking in. Or you might draw other conclusions, but that those small windows would be noticeable for their disproportion. And you were comparing those windows to the house. Sometimes disproportion is a bit more subtle, so you've all seen Michelangelo's David before, or at least so far all of the students who's ever taken my class have seen Michelangelo's David before. And what we're looking at here is a much more subtle disproportion. David's right hand is really large. It spans almost the full length of his thigh. You might not notice that at first, but if you take a close look, you start to see it. Try to uncurl his fingers and then compare it to how your hand relates to your thigh. It's very large. And this was done for a reason. The right hand is the good hand, and David was often referred to as sort of like this right hand of God when he slew Goliath. So that's especially large so that you notice it and equate him with good if you know the symbols of that period. So size, think about measurement. Scale, think about comparing two measurements. And proportion, think about the measurement of one part in comparison to the whole.